Every year, when the first rains begin to fade over the open plains of the Serengeti, the landscape changes color and rhythm. The grass, which until a few weeks ago covered the ground like an endless blanket, begins to dry up. The wind stirs up fine dust and the water sources recede. In this scenario, a decision imposes itself with no margin of choice. To stay is to die. The Great Migrations are, in essence, acts of survival on a continental scale. They are not adventures, nor are they voluntary feats. They are biological responses to a law that no animal can defy. Where there is no food, there is no life. And in this corner of East Africa, that sentence is fulfilled with ruthless precision. At the heart of this phenomenon are the wildebeests, strictly herbivorous animals, absolutely dependent on young grass and clean waterways. In total, about 1.5 million individuals make up this colossal migration, a number so vast that it is impossible to imagine it as a whole. Often, visible groups gather between 200,000 and 300,000 wildebeest moving in unison, flanked by zebras and antelopes that join this living current. The route has a circular shape and covers about 800 kilometers. It begins in the plains of the Serengeti in Tanzania, when the dry season sets in for good and the grasslands begin to be depopulated of food. The wildebeest, guided by signals that combine memory, environmental perception, and the reading of wind and distant rains, advance northward. Their goal is to reach the greener lands of the Masai Mara in Kenya, where rainfall has fed new pastures. The journey, however, is far from a simple march. It's not just about covering miles. It's about surviving each one. Along the way, the herds must face the lack of drinking water, the progressive fatigue of the weakest contagious diseases that break out in areas of high animal density, and of course, the predators that dominate these stretches. Lions, leopards, and hyenas lurk in every stretch. But none of these hunters generate as much terror as the crocodiles of the Nile. In the middle of the journey, several rivers cut off the march. The most feared is the Mara. It is not wide, but its murky, slow-moving waters hide large crocodiles, some over 5 meters long. They do not hunt, they do not stalk, they just wait. Every year their opportunistic memory brings them together in the same narrow passes, where the depth forces the wildebeest to swim. The wildebeests recognize perfectly well the danger lurking in these waters. They do not ignore the presence of crocodiles, nor do they underestimate their ferocity. But that dark current is the only way to new pastures. There is no safe detour. There is no alternative route. If they stay south, they will starve, and if they cross, many will be devoured. To migrate is to choose which death to face for a slim chance of staying alive. When the first line of wildebeest reaches the water's edge, there is a brief hesitation. The animals cluster at the margins, kicking up dust and snorting anxiously. Some drink, exhausted, others watch, some grope in the mud. Until one, driven by hunger or desperation, dives headlong into the water to cross first, ignoring everything around him. And then total chaos ensues. Thousands of bodies are thrown into the riverbed at the same time, displacing the surface of the river as if it were a single pulsating mass. Within seconds, crocodiles emerge. Their jaws close over legs, necks, and snouts. Choked shrieks mingle with the sound of breaking water. The river, muddy with mud, is soon stained with blood. Some wildebeest try to defend themselves by biting, but their teeth are useless against the armored skin of the reptiles. They push, try to plunge their horns into the mass of carnivores, but the violence of the attack and the number of bodies make any real defense impossible. Many drown, trapped between their own companions. A desperate stride, an unintentional blow can unintentionally shatter the skull of another wildebeest. Crushed, they sink hopelessly, unable to swim in the density of the group. Others are injured when they hit submerged rocks or become lost, disoriented by the force of the current. But despite the panic that engulfs them, no one backs down. No one tries to take a step back. The logic is implacable: move forward or disappear. The crocodiles make the most of it. At the big crossings, they can spend hours feeding effortlessly. Their immense bodies glide through the migrating mass with an ancestral security. They don't need to hunt, only bite. For the surviving wildebeest, the crossing is just another stage. In addition to the dangers of predators, there are other less visible but equally lethal dangers. The effort of the crossing, the accumulated stress, and the days without drinking water take their toll on the stragglers. In areas where herds are crowded, outbreaks of anthrax and hemorrhagic fever spread rapidly. And newborn calves, which must accompany the journey from their first weeks, face an even greater challenge. Small and vulnerable, they walk alongside their mothers, learning to negotiate every obstacle with instinct and resilience. Their fragility contrasts with the urgency of the journey, but in their perseverance lies the promise of the next generation. The dangers, however, are not limited to illness and exhaustion. In sections where the terrain becomes steep and slippery, progress becomes an invisible risk. The herds descend with difficulty, and in the midst of the confusion, an uncontrolled avalanche sweeps away dozens of less skilled specimens. Many fall, crashing against sharp rocks, with deep wounds that knock them down instantly. Some are trapped under the weight of their companions with no chance of escape. Others roll downhill, battered by the fall, until they disappear among holes and rocks. Only the most experienced manage to dodge the treacherous steps where others have fallen. Seeing so many lifeless bodies lying on the ground, no one stops. There is no mourning, no waiting. The crowd moves forward like a natural machinery without contemplation. The smell of death emanating from the bodies attracts predators and scavengers from miles around. Here the danger is twofold: to avoid falling and not to become a signal for those lurking in the distance. This great Odyssey, with its crossings and dangers, extends over several weeks, with constant wear and tear marking each step, with the body resisting more by impulse than by force. Wildebeest are no amateurs in this journey. Their anatomy is designed to withstand the heat and prolonged fatigue, efficient breathing, muscles adapted for long days, and chemical mechanisms that regulate adrenaline and stress. Their evolution has given them resistance to extreme heat and water scarcity, allowing them to advance when other animals succumbed. It is then that, after fatigue and danger, the march reaches a temporary refuge. The herds reach the high, wet grasslands of the Masai Mara. There the grass is green again and the streams overflow with fresh water. It is just a respite, an ephemeral lull before the inevitable return of the dry season and the continuation of the cycle. The Great Migration has no clear beginning or end. It is a constant movement that follows the patterns of climate and vegetation. A relentless sequence that selects year after year the strongest, most resilient and fastest. In this cyclical journey, death is a habitual presence accepted by the very nature of the phenomenon, and so the logic of the wild world is established. Life is not preserved in stillness, but in movement. What remains is condemned to disappear. That which advances, even at the cost of its own fear, finds its opportunity. Before the day dawns, when the horizon barely hints over the open plains of the Serengeti, thousands of striped shadows are already moving in silence. There is no singing, no announcements, no farewells, only the uniform sound of hooves on dry land and the wind cutting the parched grass. Thus begins a new journey for the zebras, which, like every year, must leave the lands where they were born in search of a territory that can sustain them. In these expanses of East Africa, it is not the one who imposes his strength that survives, but the one who knows how to keep moving without stopping. And in this dynamic, the zebra's strategy differs from that of the wildebeest. Although they share territory and routes for a good part of the year, zebras leave earlier. Their keen eyesight and memory of the trails allow them to feel out the land, anticipate movements, and blaze a trail. They are the first front line of a migration that does not allow delays. The reason is as simple as it is implacable. They are herbivores, and the grass that used to cover the savanna from one day to the next has begun to disappear. The ground is cracking, the watercourses are evaporating under the merciless sun, and the grass that used to feed the young is disappearing. The only option is to move. The destination is to the north, in the direction of the Masai Mara lands, where the recent rains have covered the fields with a new green and the streams run fresh. It is about 500 kilometers, a journey without respite, without long stops, and with no room for the weak. On this journey, time does not wait. The calves are born in full motion. The mother moves just a few meters away from the herd, gives birth on the dusty ground, and in less than 10 minutes, the foal has to stand up. There is no room for fragility. The mother can neither carry it nor protect it more than necessary. The logic is the same for all of them. Keep moving. If she stops, the herd disappears, and with it, the only chance of survival. The young, staggering and disoriented, discover the world in its most brutal version. They barely understand that they exist, and they must learn to walk and trot as far as their mother indicates. Their instinct tells them that danger can come from anywhere, and that no one will come back for them if they are late. The following days are endless. Under an intense sun, the air becomes dry and heavy, and the earth accumulates a constant heat. Temperatures can exceed 40 degrees, burning the skin and quickly sapping one's strength. Zebras roam dry plains, dotted with scattered trees and increasingly murky and scarce waterholes. But these herbivores cannot stop. They ignore the heat and continue with all their might, driven by the imperious need to survive. Dust covers their bodies and sick hatchlings lag behind the pace. It doesn't take much to leave them at the mercy of what's next. Zebras have their strategy, but so do their predators. Hyenas, masters of opportunism, have been reading this migratory movement for generations. They know every route, every instant, every pause. They do not hunt at random. They limit themselves to observing the scene from afar, lurking on the margins, waiting for the herd in its advance to leave the most fragile to their fate. These creatures feel no pity for the young. They do not distinguish between a newborn foal, an exhausted mother, or a sick adult. Everything that is delayed is a resource. In this context, they act in organized groups, communicating with low growls and strategic positions. They attack quickly and with effective violence. They do not waste unnecessary energy. They pursue prey that they can bring down effortlessly, and when they spot a straggling calf, they separate it with surgical precision. In a matter of seconds, they surround it. The herd moves in cool, precise synchrony, blocking all possible escape routes. The prey barely has time to emit a brief squeal, a muffled sound that is lost amidst the noise of the grassland before the hyenas pounce on it. They do not seek an instant kill. They tear the skin with their sharp fangs, disarticulate the limbs with violent and precise movements until the body is immobile. In seconds, it's all over. The remains are scattered on the ground, and the feast that begins attracts other opportunists who complete the natural cycle of opportunism. The vultures arrive from the heights. Their wings clip the sky in wide circles before descending. They land near the carcasses with awkward movements, hopping forward and swoop down on the remains. They peck at what the hyenas leave behind, fragments of flesh, guts, tendons. They break the hardened skin, separate the lighter bones, and dispute over the carcasses with harsh squawks. When the hubbub dies down and the birds concentrate on the smaller remains, a solitary figure slips through the shadows and dust, a jackal. His steps are cautious, measured, and his eyes gleam with a mixture of alertness and hunger. Swift and wary, several specimens scurry among the bones, snatching chunks of hardened flesh. The vultures squawk and flap their wings in attempts to chase them away, but the jackals don't stop. They ignore the flock, even if there are dozens of them. No matter how many eyes watch them from on high, no matter how many calls claim what is left. The rule is clear: survive at any cost. The jackals fight, pounce, sink their teeth in and retreat. They take what they can before losing it in another mouth. Like zebras, wildebeests, birds and scavengers, they must feed or perish. It is a cycle ordered by urgency. Nothing is wasted here. What one animal does not consume, another takes advantage of. When danger lurks, unlike other prey, zebras avoid dispersal. Instinct tells them to stay together at all times. They run in tight circles, creating visual confusion that disorients predators. The black and white stripes on their bodies generate a hypnotic effect when they move in groups. The patterns intertwine, making it difficult for the hunter to lock onto a specific prey. In this confusion, zebras gain vital seconds to regroup. It is not a foolproof defense, but it greatly reduces casualties. They are not passive prey. When attacked, they kick hard enough to break jaws or ribs. A mother defending her young does not hesitate to deliver lethal kicks, and predators know it. That determination, that unspoken pact of resistance, allows most of them to advance. For days they cross parched terrain, open savannas and dwindling waterways. Some areas are so arid that dust remains in suspension hours after the herd has passed. At night, temperatures drop sharply, and nocturnal predators such as leopards intensify their activity. But even in these circumstances, zebras do not stop their march. Their bodies are adapted to long journeys. Their hooves can withstand miles over hard ground, and their digestive system allows them to eat low-quality grasses when there is no other option. Foals, which began the journey shaky, stiffen up quickly. Those that make it through the first few days are more likely to complete the migration successfully. After weeks of travel, the zebras manage to reach the high plains of the Masai Mara. There, recent rains have covered the fields with fresh grass and clean water. It is a different landscape, green, wide, and with abundant waterholes. It is the reward after the harsh exile imposed by the force of African nature. For a short time, the herd rests. They wallow in the mud to soothe their sun-cracked skin, and the calves finally drink without interruption. The danger does not disappear, but it is mitigated. The large predators are still on the prowl, but the abundance of specimens gathered in the same place manages to disperse the pressure. Each animal manages to find food without taking too many risks. For a few weeks, this balance is maintained, just enough time for the young to strengthen their legs, for the wounds to heal, and for the bodies to recover some of what was lost. But in the savannah, no calm lasts too long. When the rains stop and the grass becomes scarce again, the march restarts, the route is reversed. What was yesterday an arrival becomes a departure, and the cycle continues without end. Zebras are not simple prey. They have survived through a mixture of endurance, group strategy, and the ability to face their hunters with remarkable courage. Those that die along the way become food. Those that resist feed the next generation. In these confines, life is kept in motion, and only those who accept this perpetual pact find their reward. But this logic of movement does not belong only to the African savanna. In the frozen regions of the far north, other herds face their own challenge. Different in form, identical in essence. In the high latitudes of Canada, where the boreal forest thins and gives way to open tundra, winter sets extreme conditions that no animal can ignore. In these lands, life survives thanks to organization, endurance, and an ancestral memory that dictates with no margin for error when it is time to leave. The caribou, the great deer of the north, are the protagonists of one of the largest and oldest migrations in the northern hemisphere. They are neither simple prey nor animals that flee without order. Instead, they are creatures adapted to an extreme environment with a strategy honed over millennia. Each year, when snow covers the feeding grounds and polar winds sweep away the last available lichens, the great herds set out on their march to lands where subsistence is still possible. The starting point is the vast taigé of the Yukon and Northwest Territories. There, in coniferous forests and icy clearings, they have spent the autumn months feeding on bark and low-growing shoots. But when winter reaches, its most severe natural reserves are depleted. There is not enough food left to sustain thousands of individuals, and predators intensify their activity. The reason for migration is not a whim. It is not only hunger. It is also to avoid areas with a high concentration of mosquitoes and horseflies in summer, which can weaken the animals by causing anemia and transmitting diseases. But there is something else: the need to ensure reproduction in open and safe areas, where the offspring can have a better chance of survival. A genetic tradition without conscious explanation guides these herds to the same places every year. The destination is to the north, towards the open plains of the Arctic tundra, where the snows melt later and lichens sprout under the frost. These are journeys of more than 1,000 kilometers, traveled by herds of more than 200,000 specimens. The organization is strict. They do not move as a disorderly mass. They advance in long lines, formations defined by experience and hierarchy. The most resistant specimens occupy the front positions. They are in charge of breaking trail, testing the snow-covered ground, detecting hidden crevices in frozen rivers, and withstanding the wind in their faces. Behind them are the pregnant females and the previous year's offspring, and at the back are the weakest and most straggling individuals. There is no charity in this formation. It is a structure that maximizes the odds that the majority will make it to the destination. The journey is relentless. Over the weeks, the caribou must face freezing rivers, sudden blizzards, and temperatures that plunge below 40 degrees below zero. Physical exhaustion builds up and some individuals fall. But unlike in other migrations, the casualties here are minimal. Caribou are specialists in walking. Their hooves are adapted to open on snow and close on firm ground, allowing them to move efficiently over variable terrain. In addition, their dense fur acts as a natural insulator, composed of thousands of hollow hairs that trap warm air close to the body and resist heat loss even in the most extreme conditions. But neither anatomy nor resistance is enough to guarantee survival in this environment. Because in these territories, threats do not always come from cold or hunger. The most constant and organized threat is from wolves. The herds of grey wolves follow the movements of the caribou with meticulous patience. They do not attack at random. They study, observe, and wait for the right conditions to do so. Because what for other predators represents an easy hunt, for wolves is a risky enterprise. Despite what might be assumed, caribou are not docile victims. Deer know this game. They detect the presence of wolves from miles away by scent, by movements through the trees, by changes in the behavior of scavenging birds. And in the face of that threat, they adjust their formation. The pack becomes compact. The young are positioned in the center. Strong adults position themselves on the flanks and rear. When the wolves try to approach, the first reactions are calculated. Caribou increase their walking speed but do not disperse. They avoid wooded areas where the risk of ambush increases and prefer to advance through open fields. The wolves, sensing that they must act before the herd reaches the open plains, organize their attacks. They surround, isolate, and seek to generate panic at all costs. But herein lies the caribou's greatest strength. They do not allow themselves to be drawn into disorder. If a group gets separated, instead of fleeing in opposite directions, they run in a tight circle. This maneuver confuses the wolves who, in trying to focus on prey, see repeating fur patterns, identical movements, and their individual hunting instinct fails. In the midst of the confusion and with adrenaline pumping, male deer turn and lunge with their large antlers. Their sideways blows impact with force, capable of knocking a wolf down or breaking a leg. Wolves attempting to enter the center of the pack are confronted by these lethal weapons and without a second thought retreat. This behavior has forced the wolves to adjust their tactics. If they attack, they must do so at night, when visibility decreases and the extreme cold wears down stragglers faster. But even then, the success rate for the predators is low. For every hunting attempt, only 1 or 2 caribou perish. Unlike other migrations, here the predator rarely gets what it expects. The slow pulse of winter is finally broken when the herds cross rivers of cracked ice and wind-swept plains, reaching the Arctic tundra. There, despite its inhospitable appearance, a window of survival opens. Temperatures, though still harsh, do not drop as low as in the boreal forest, hovering around 0 degrees in the thawing months. The snow retreats, leaving behind extensive carpets of mosses and grasses that promise sustenance for the coming season. The landscape is vast, a succession of open plains stretching to the horizon, dotted with frozen ponds and swampy areas. Of the more than 200,000 caribou that set out, more than 90% have made it back alive. The casualties are concentrated in older individuals, sick calves from the previous year, and some adults that did not resist the wolf ambushes. Despite this, the survival rate is high, the result of a migratory strategy perfected over generations. The herd disperses in small family groups, occupying strategic areas where food is more abundant and the terrain allows them to watch for possible threats. Pregnant females move away from the main herd in search of discreet shelters, chosen among the slight undulations of the terrain or behind natural formations that protect them from the wind and possible threats. There, with patience and calm, they prepare for the crucial moment, giving birth. The fawns are born with a dense and soft fur that protects them from the cold and weigh about 10 kilos. From their first hours, they are ready to walk because in this harsh environment there is no time for weakness. In less than half an hour, their trembling legs are already supporting them, urging them to stand firm and keep up with the group's pace of life. But the real reward of migration is not just food. It is genetic continuity. The males who led the march, who withstood the most adverse conditions and repelled predators, now earn the right to mate. It is not a ceremonial prize. The females select their breeders by observing who led the trek, who defended the herd, and who arrived with antlers intact and whole body. After the frenetic march and the birth of calves, the next stage in the caribou life cycle takes center stage: mating rituals. Males begin to mark their territory by rubbing facial glands against dry branches and stones, leaving scent trails. Physical confrontation is inevitable. Horns clash with dry violence in brief and measured encounters. They do not seek to annihilate the rival. Their goal is to displace him, to drive him back. The victors gain access to a small group of females that, depending on their migration performance and vigor, they will accept or not. These behaviors guarantee that the offspring are born from the most resistant specimens, not from the most aggressive or the largest, but from those that have proven their leadership capacity and their resistance in the face of adversity. It is a pragmatic criterion, adjusted to an environment where real strength is measured in kilometers traveled, not in punctual battles. The calm in the tundra is fleeting. While the cubs grow stronger and the adults regain weight, grizzly bears hover in the distance, and thunderstorms can whip up gusts of icy wind that sweep across the terrain in minutes. But in that interval of weeks, the tundra offers abundant food, clean water, and open space. Where collective vigilance keeps opportunists at bay, the tundra, vast and brutal, grants no privileges. But those who understand it and challenge it methodically conquer it. And the caribou, year after year, continue to leave their mark on this territory that, for a short time, recognizes them as its rightful owners. Thousands of kilometers to the south, where the boreal forest dissolves in the white vastness of Antarctica, another journey of resistance and precision begins. On the Ross Ice Shelf, where the winds roar relentlessly, the emperor penguin migration unfolds with an unchanging rhythm. Thousands leave the sea ice in March for Cape Washington and other breeding colonies, fixed enclaves occupied by their ancestors for generations. The march occurs in the dark of the austral winter, when ice covers the sea and temperatures drop to 60 degrees below zero. In these extreme conditions, the landscape becomes a deadly labyrinth. Crevasses hidden beneath the snow that can swallow stragglers, and mounds of hardened snow that slow progress and scatter groups. In this environment, to stray from the formation is practically a death sentence. But hostile terrain is not their only challenge. During migration, these landbirds do not feed. They rely entirely on the fat accumulated before departure, which is their only reserve. The constant exertion consumes these reserves rapidly, and each passing day reduces the margin of survival. With every step, the ice crunches under their feet, and the winds whip up clouds of snow that blind their eyesight of snow that blinds the eye and disorients the less experienced. The combination of extreme cold and lack of food forces the animals to maintain an iron discipline. They advance in closed lines to conserve the collective warmth, alternating walking on their short legs with sliding on their bellies. This technique allows them to save effort in the longest stretches and to maintain the pace of the group. As the blizzards intensify, the columns become even more compact. Individuals take turns at the front, braving the icy wind while the others take cover behind their bodies. It is an ancestral strategy, perfected over generations, where survival depends on maintaining cohesion and sharing the wear and tear. Among the compact crowd, a penguin loses pace, his weakened body yielding to the relentless advance of the march. Its completely exhausted body gives out on the soft snow. For a few seconds, the closest ones falter. They turn their heads slightly, emit brief, muffled calls. There are no answers. The blizzard covers the lifeless body quickly. Its silhouette, once visible, fades under a layer of wind-blown snow. The group remains motionless for only a moment. There is no way to assist him. In this place, an attempt to help would mean exposing the entire formation. The decision had been made long before they set out. Whoever falls is left behind. Without further ado, the column resumes its advance, because to stop is to invite others to follow the same destiny. Only the gap in the snow, already covered by the blizzard, remains as a reminder that in these harsh conditions, even stopping to look is an action that no one can afford. The emperor penguin migration turns out to be a slow and merciless journey, where any animal that stops for just a few minutes risks not reaching the colony. But after endless days of relentless marching, when the strength seems to be exhausted and the cold becomes a tangible enemy, the herds finally reach the breeding colonies, the point where life is at stake and hope is renewed. Here, thousands of emperors gather in dense colonies, a sea of black and white bodies stretching as far as the eye can see. Arrival does not mark the end of the migratory cycle. It is just the beginning of the most demanding stage where the greatest danger begins to lurk, the incubation of the chicks. Upon arrival, the females lay a single egg, and the males take on the responsibility of protecting it. For more than 2 months, they remain immobile, with energy reserves slowly depleting, guarding the egg in an abdominal pouch. They face storms that bury the colonies under layers of snow and winds that can exceed 200 kilometers per hour. The migration is over, but the struggle to preserve life continues, silent and steadfast in the heart of one of the harshest climates on the planet. Throughout this time, the females enter the icy waters of the Southern Ocean, dodging treacherous currents and the constant stalking of leopard seals in the depths. Their journey is a relentless struggle against hunger and the clock, and only the strongest make it back to the colony. When the females return, the colony becomes organized chaos. Each pair is recognized by unique calls, audible despite the biting wind. Newly hatched hatchlings receive regurgitated food, but many die from cold or starvation if mothers delay. Surviving chicks face new dangers. Leopard seals patrol the shores, dragging the youngest who venture into the water. The adults form protective barriers, but it is impossible to cope with such voracious and efficient predators. The entire effort of the long migratory journey is threatened by these attacks, reminding us that survival here is never guaranteed. But for those specimens that manage to resist all the dangers, the reward is a new beginning. The hatchlings grow up under the biting wind and the grey sky, strengthening their bodies and senses every day in an environment that does not forgive mistakes. They are the living promise of migration, the legacy that defies cold and death. This cycle, repeated each year, sustains emperor penguin colonies. But climate change, by reducing sea ice, is forcing the colonies to move farther and farther away. Each step on this journey, from initial crevasses to final storms, is a test where survival depends on endurance and timing. In Antarctica, the migration of emperor penguins is a calculated struggle against an environment that gives no respite. Each broken egg, each frozen body, shows that life here is won day by day, on a continent where ice dictates the rules and death awaits at every mistake. But not all migrations take place on land, and not all the protagonists of these voyages are easy prey. Beyond the shores, under the blue immensity of the oceans, one of the oldest and most sophisticated giants this planet has ever known moves. Humpback whales undertake each year one of the longest and most mysterious migratory journeys in the animal world, defying overwhelming distances, latent risks, and an ever-changing ocean. In the icy waters of the Arctic during the summer months, these cetaceans feed relentlessly, accumulating reserves that must sustain them over thousands of kilometers of travel. They do not move out of hunger because the open ocean always offers food in some remote corner. The reason for their migration is different: to ensure the continuity of the species in warm, calm waters, where the young can be born and develop far from the natural predators that lurk in the polar latitudes. It is a strategy that has been repeated without interruption for millions of years. Humpback whales, whose migratory routes can extend up to 8,000 kilometers, move from the cold waters of the Arctic to tropical areas such as the coasts of Hawaii, Australia, or Madagascar. The routes vary according to the populations, but the pattern is constant. They flee the cold and hunting killer whales to guide their young in temperate water regions where the risk of predation decreases and the environment favors the development of the newborns. Each migration mobilizes more than 10,000 individuals in some oceanic sectors. They do not do so at random. Their routes follow ancestral lines engraved in a biological memory that dates back to the early Eocene, 50 million years ago, when the ancestors of these whales, creatures known as Pakicetus, walked on land. That ancient history left an indelible mark. Whales retain lungs, not gills, and breathe air, remembering with each exhalation their terrestrial past. This migratory legacy was inscribed in their behavior, leading them to travel absurd distances in search of a safe destination. Communication during these journeys is fundamental. Humpback whales emit complex low-frequency songs that can travel hundreds of kilometers through the water. Each group develops a kind of dialect that allows for family cohesion, transmission of roots, and the location of fish schools or resting areas. Mothers maintain almost constant contact with their young, modulating tones to reassure them and warn them of danger. At certain times, the family groups coordinate through these acoustic signals to modify the direction of travel, adapting to unforeseen currents and hunting areas. During the journey, all is not calm, as the waters can become a battleground. Orcas, organized in pods, stalk with precision, coordinating attacks that reduce escape options. Large sharks patrol the depths, and ocean storms unleash forces that test even the strongest travelers. In the crowd, some young whales become isolated, separated from the group and vulnerable, becoming accessible prey for these predators. In addition to the dangers imposed by nature, human presence adds a new, invisible but lethal challenge. In areas where maritime traffic is intense, cargo ships ply the waters with indifference, becoming deadly obstacles. Collisions are frequent, and propellers spin with a power capable of amputating an adult whale as easily as cutting off a branch. However, humpback whales do not navigate blindly. They possess a remarkable navigational ability that combines memory, magnetic references, and subtle changes in the salinity and temperature of the water. They detect these nuances with precision, knowing when to tack or when to stop in a plankton-rich area to replenish their energy. They do not drift. They follow exact routes, passed down from generation to generation. In times of danger, whales display their intelligence in a palpable way. Whole groups surround an injured calf, forming a defensive circle while the adults slap the water with their fins and tails, creating waves that make it difficult for the killer whales to attack. This behavior is repeatedly observed in encounters with predators, showing an effective collective strategy. Occasionally, a humpback whale lifts a seal harassed by sharks with its body, keeping it safe until the danger dissipates. These gestures are not simple instinctive reflexes, but conscious decisions that reveal exceptional collective intelligence and strategic solidarity. After weeks of travel, the herds finally reach their destination. On the coasts of Hawaii, the surface waters warm to over 24 degrees, and the depth decreases abruptly, creating perfect zones for calving and feeding their young. There, the sea remains calm for much of the year, with minimal predator incursions and no strong currents to put the newborns at risk. Family relationships are strengthened in these areas. Mothers, aunts, and sisters collaborate in the care of the hatchlings, surrounding and guiding them during their first movements to protect them from any immediate threat. For their part, the adults show the young females the safest areas, and the males remain at a distance, grouping in areas where they sing prolonged songs, some with unique patterns that vary from year to year. These songs serve reproductive purposes, but also mark acoustic territories, allowing each group to establish its boundaries without resorting to physical confrontation. At sea, violence is not always the first response. Most conflicts are resolved by sound displays and physical displays, leaps, tails, and displays of strength that rarely result in lethal injuries. They will remain in these waters for a few months until the hatchlings reach a suitable size to make the return journey. Then, the cycle will repeat itself. With each generation, routes are perfected, songs are adapted, and the collective memory of humpback whales continues to trace invisible paths over the ocean that have lasted millions of years. No other animal on this planet combines such migratory capacity, social organization, and tactical intelligence, and it is that conjunction that keeps these gigantic creatures not only alive, but as one of the oldest and most successful life forms in the ocean. Not all migrations are quick, nor do they all end successfully. In the remote waters of the eastern Pacific, the Galapagos archipelago emerges as an ancestral refuge. It is a slow and silent migration that has been repeated for centuries. The giant tortoises, long-lived and patient, undertake a journey that defies time and the accelerated pace of other travelers. Their slowness hides a firm determination, a silent impulse that leads them to repeat a vital journey for the survival of their species. These turtles, the largest on the planet, can weigh more than 200 kilos and live for more than a century. Their arched shells and long necks allow them to access the sparse vegetation in the arid and rocky environments of the islands. But even they, creatures shaped by endurance and time, must migrate when conditions become untenable. Each year, as the dry season progresses, the coastal plains and low-lying areas of some islands lose their greenery. Vegetation becomes sparse and competition increases. Land iguanas, finches, and other herbivorous species begin to compete for the very resources the tortoise needs to survive. The terrain hardens, the ponds dry up, and food is no longer enough for everyone. It is then that these reptiles are pushed to undertake a journey to the higher parts of the island, where the constant mist and humidity support a more abundant vegetation. This movement is not massive in numbers like that of the wildebeest or deer, but it is in risk. Of each group that starts the march, many do not manage to complete the journey. The distance does not seem excessive for other animals, between 10 and 15 kilometers of irregular roads, volcanic ascents, and arid zones. But for these slow-moving giants, the effort can take weeks. Along the route, the remains of ancient migrations accumulate as a reminder of the difficulty. Empty shells, bleached by the sun and years, appear on the sides of the nature trails. They are the evidence of those who did not make it. There are no bodies left, only the hardened keratin domes that once protected lives that did not endure. Yet these losses are part of the cycle, a silent reminder of the risk and demand that each journey entails. Departing tortoises know, by instinct accumulated over generations, where they must go. There are no marked paths or signs visible to the human eye, but natural slopes, subtle moisture changes in the vegetation, and their genetic memory tell them the direction. Scientists have recorded that some tortoises return to the same food patches every year, even over decades. Along the way, obstacles are constant: rough terrain, unshaded areas, and high daytime temperatures. Although few species prey on an adult tortoise, mainly because of the almost total absence of natural predators in Galapagos and the resistance provided by their thick, solid shell, these reptiles face other equally implacable enemies. Exhaustion after traveling long distances under an inclement sun and dehydration, which slowly deteriorates their strength, threaten their survival. Young turtles, with even softer shells and less robust bodies, or those dragging rock injuries, see their chances of completing the migration drastically reduced. After weeks of slowly crawling up steeper and steeper slopes, the turtles face the final leg of their journey. The rough, stony terrain forces every movement to extreme effort, while the sun, though gentle, dries the soil and hardens every step. But despite the accumulated fatigue upon reaching the higher areas, the landscape begins to change little by little. The air becomes cooler and more humid, while an enveloping silence is only interrupted by the constant whisper of drizzle. Small patches of forest emerge, offering a haven full of life. Upright cacti, fresh herbs, and succulent plants thrive in this generous corner. These giant reptiles, after the arduous Odyssey, disperse slowly, taking advantage of every morsel to regain their strength. Some remain there for weeks, even months, in a backwater where the wear and tear is left behind, until the first rains announce the return to the lowlands and the beginning of a new cycle. Not all of those that left make it. It is estimated that, in particularly dry seasons, more than 30% are stranded along the way. However, those that complete the journey not only ensure their immediate survival, they are also the ones that in these safe food territories will be able to reproduce. In Galapagos, only the specimens that demonstrate the endurance and capacity to face these journeys are included in future generations. When a female reaches the highlands, she looks for suitable nesting sites, soft ground, protected by low vegetation. There, she digs a deep hole with her hind legs where she deposits her eggs, which will remain covered and hidden for weeks. The hatchlings will begin the same migratory cycle as their ancestors. Thus, year after year, this silent and persistent migration continues. In Galapagos, each abandoned shell is a silent testimony to the sacrifice that life demands. And each tortoise that reaches the highlands reaffirms the continuity of a legacy that defies time and adversity as no other species manages to do. The river roars, the current drags branches, stones, and dry leaves, but among this liquid chaos, thousands of reddish bodies resist. In a stubborn struggle against the relentless force of the water, the salmon have begun their final journey. It is the culmination of a life cycle, a journey written in their genes for millions of years. From the open waters of the Pacific Ocean off the coasts of Alaska and Canada, each year between late summer and early fall, Sockeye salmon make their way up the rivers of North America in one of nature's most brutal and demanding migrations. They are born in these same waterways in frozen headwaters more than 1,000 kilometers from the sea. They spend their first months hidden among rocks, surviving aquatic predators and the current. When their bodies reach sufficient strength, they descend into the ocean, where they grow and feed for years. But the call of spawning is inescapable. It is a biological mandate that ignores any obstacle, any wear and tear, any possibility of reversal. What forces them to migrate is not the search for resources, since they have plenty of food in the sea. It is the need to return to the same stretch of river where they were born in order to perpetuate their species. This journey, more than 1,000 kilometers against the current, forces them to go up violent currents and overcome jumps several meters high, while predators lurk in the murky waters and on the banks. On the banks of the river, hidden behind the damp trees, a brown bear waits. His senses detect the trembling of the water, the crash of bodies, the vibration of the riverbed. He knows this is his chance. Hibernation is approaching, and his body demands to store a sufficient caloric reserve to survive the months of ice and darkness. He will not take a fish. He will not catch a single one. This river, in this instant, belongs to him. The bear descends to a flat rock that interrupts the current. There he positions himself steady, immobile, and lets the river do the work. The salmon, unable to stop his advance, pass under his paws. With a swift claw, he catches one and pulls it out of the water. He does not stop to kill it with precision. It disembowels it on the spot, discarding parts and selecting the viscera rich in fat. What he does not consume falls into the stream but is not wasted. Within seconds, dozens of gulls and corvids descend to claim their share. The remains, flesh and blood, return to the water, staining it red, and the bodies that continue swimming do so over the carcasses of their own. From the heights, the bald eagles keep watch. Their vision is capable of detecting the silvery glow of a moving fish hundreds of meters away. They know this phenomenon. Year after year, it repeats itself. When one of the salmon tries to make a violent leap in the river, it is exposed in the air for just an instant, long enough for the claws to close over its back. Its fate is sealed in that brief instant. The fish is carried to an exposed rock, where it will be torn to pieces and later shared with the hungry hatchlings waiting in the nest. Meanwhile, the surviving salmon have no respite. The journey is neither linear nor forgiving. They have to face waterfalls, narrow stretches where the current slams them against the rocks. Exhaustion is absolute. Their bodies, designed to live exclusively in the sea, suffer progressive dehydration from prolonged exposure to fresh water. The skin becomes opaque, worn out, the fins tear, the scales fall off, and many end up dragged to the shore where their strength is definitively exhausted. However, some resist. The fittest, those who have managed to dodge bears, eagles, and sharp rocks, reach the spawning grounds, the stretches of calm water at the headwaters of the rivers. It is there where the most important act of their lives begins. The females dig a small hole in the riverbed with their hind flippers, where they deposit up to 5,000 eggs. The males, worn out, deformed, with their jaws curved by the effort, release their sperm over them. The natural fertilizer of these dying bodies will not be a waste. Even their decomposition will enrich the waters, providing nutrients for the next generation. At that instant, after fulfilling their biological purpose, the bodies are abandoned. Many die in the following hours, others resist only days. The river becomes a succession of corpses, of bloated bodies that serve as food for opportunistic predators and scavenging birds. Even the fry themselves, which will be born months later, will take advantage of the remains to feed in their first days of life. Of the thousands that set off from the sea, less than 10% make it to the spawning site. But that tiny fraction is enough to sustain a species that has withstood glaciations, climatic changes, alterations in river courses, and more recently, human intervention. This migration confirms the absence of clemency in nature. Only one implacable logic rules. Only those who manage to evade the multiple threats that lie in wait for them on each leg of the journey survive. Each kilometer traveled under the relentless current is a definitive test, where only the fittest ensure the continuity of the species. While in the rivers of North America, the salmon struggle against the current in a last attempt to perpetuate their lineage, in another corner of the planet, under the blue vastness of the open ocean, an even more brutal migration takes place. In a stretch where light barely grazes the first few meters of water before fading into a dense, unfathomable blue, millions of tiny fish move en masse. It is not an exodus of giants. These are schools of sardines that each year form a larger living organism, moving in unison in search of warmer water, abundant food, and safe places to spawn. But unlike the rivers of North America, here there are no banks and no obvious course, only a liquid horizon stretching everywhere, where the threat can come from any angle, further increasing the chance of survival. The shoal is their only defense, a collective mind that moves as a unit, reacting to the slightest change in water pressure, to the flash of a predator, to the distant noise of a stalking animal. There are no leaders or orders, only the ancient memory of the species imprinted in the reflexes of each individual that keeps the group cohesive. So separating is tantamount to certain death. Unlike salmon, which swim with determination against the current, these fish migrate following ocean currents and warm water masses that guarantee them food. Their movement does not respond to a rigid territorial destiny, but to a constant pursuit of resources that change with the temperature and the whims of the ocean. If they do not migrate, they die. And if they do migrate, they probably do too. But the odds improve when they move together. Constant movement is the only certainty. Sharks tirelessly patrol the columns of fish. They tear at the edges of the shoal, tearing through the formation and forcing the mass to compress even further. Each attack triggers a swirl of scales and mangled bodies that attracts new hunters. Dolphins, killer whales, and tuna join the chase, taking advantage of the chaos. Even baleen whales, veritable fortresses of tons, advance with their mouths open, devouring thousands of fish in a single gulp. From the heights, gannets and gulls stalk. They detect from the sky the silver spot moving just below the surface and swoop down, piercing the water like projectiles, snatching prey before the shoal has time to regroup. But the most relentless is not a predator, it is the ocean itself. Currents shift without warning, trapping fish in eddies of cold water that carry them away from productive areas. Storms unleash monstrous waves capable of scattering groups in a matter of minutes. Temperature changes turn lethal areas that, until days ago, offered food and safe refuge. And yet they continue. They do not stop. They do not hesitate. Each individual acts as a cell in a larger body that moves in patterns they have perfected over countless generations. A school of fish can stretch for several kilometers and contain tens of thousands of fish, spinning and contracting in hypnotic spirals when danger erupts. Remarkably, this migration, like that of whales and salmon, is due to a primitive heritage engraved in their biology since ancient times. It is estimated that these fish developed this migratory strategy during the Cretaceous, more than 100 million years ago, when the seas were dominated by marine reptiles and the continents had not yet fully separated. But unlike those eras, today's ocean is more fragmented, more polluted, and more plundered by humans. Nevertheless, migration persists. Because it is above any momentary adversity, it is the only guarantee of survival. At the end of their journey, those who manage to overcome sharks, whales, birds, and currents reach coastal areas rich in nutrients, where the waters are agitated with plankton and small prey. There, in smaller schools, the spawning phase begins. The females release millions of eggs that float in suspension, becoming food for other species from the first moment. Only a tiny fraction will manage to survive and repeat the cycle. The harshness of the ocean does not allow for sentimentality. In this migration, there are no heroes, no remembered individuals. What matters is that the shoal as an entity survives, that the flow is maintained, that the species perpetuates itself. From the burrows emerge the red crabs, a scarlet tide of tens of millions, a leaderless army covering the ground like spilled blood. There is no choice in their march. There is no hesitation. Only one implacable law: reach the sea or vanish in the attempt. On this island lost in the Indian Ocean, more than 50 million bodies, small but tenacious, advance like a living current, climbing rocks, crossing roads, piling up on bridges of shells. Roads, logs, slippery slopes, nothing slows their momentum. But this journey is no leisurely march, it's a real carnage. Danger lurks at every step. On the muddy paths, yellow ants, invasive and lethal, wait in swarms. Their poison, a burning acid, knocks down thousands of crabs in minutes, leaving empty shells scattered like the remnants of a lost fight. On the roads, vehicles crush hundreds of thousands, leaving their bodies blown apart and staining the asphalt a darker red. And on the cliffs lining the coast, the chaos reaches its climax. Millions of crabs hurl themselves towards the shore, but the ground gives way under their weight. Dozens of bodies cascade down, crushed against the sharp rocks, their shells broken into fragments that the wind carries away. Others, pushed by the crowd, huddle in narrow crevices, suffocating under the weight of their own companions. Those who reach the shore face a final challenge. The females, laden with tens of thousands of eggs, cling to the rocks, waiting for the precise moment dictated by the tides when the combination of sun and moon creates the ideal currents. In an instant, they release their offspring into the sea, a dark cloud dissolving into the foam. Again, as with all marine species, not all of their eggs survive. Voracious fish and treacherous currents devour millions before they can develop, and the crabs that do manage to release their cargo are not safe. Exhausted, many are swept away by the waves, their bodies spinning hopelessly in the current. As the days pass, a new wave forms on the shore. The hatchlings, tiny and frantic, emerge from the ocean, climbing the rocks in a desperate race to the jungle. But the way back is a field of death. Yellow ants lurk again, and opportunistic birds, attracted by the movement, pluck the hatchlings from the ground with sharp beaks. The unknown remains: how red crabs are produced here en masse every year, in quantities that no other place in the world knows. On this island, the absence of large predators created a unique scenario. For millennia, these crustaceans have thrived, multiplying unchecked. Each female carries thousands of eggs, a vital strategy to ensure that despite countless threats, some survive and continue the cycle. But that balance is broken. Yellow ants, an invasive species accidentally introduced by human activity, have caused massive mortality, decimating an army that for millennia seemed invincible. Despite this threat, the inhabitants of the island respect this ancestral march. During migration, roads are blocked, tunnels are enabled, and bridges are adapted so that millions of crabs can cross without interruption. Yet despite multiple attempts, the destruction does not cease. This red tide, with its fury and fragility, is a relentless dance. Millions advance, thousands perish, and only a few secure the next generation. On Christmas Island, the ground trembles under the weight of an inescapable truth. To move is to live, but living always comes at a cost. From the oceanic confines of Christmas Island, where millions of small bodies face invisible and constant dangers, to the vast African plains, migration presents itself as an essential phenomenon of life. In these dry, sun-cracked lands, other giants must abandon the familiar to survive. In this sun-battered land, water dictates the fate of all. And when the rains are delayed, even the largest creatures of the savanna must abandon the known to search for the indispensable. Thus begins one of nature's most imposing and harshest migrations, that of the African elephants. A vast tapestry of cracks and dust covers the landscape. The drought has torn away the shadows, leaving only a motionless and desolate horizon. An old elephant tries to pluck with his trunk the few dry leaves left on a withered tree, but he only gets fragile remnants. There are no more to collect. Every day they stay here, the threat of death increases. African elephants, which can weigh between 4,000 and 7,000 kilos, need to consume more than 150 kilos of vegetation and up to 180 liters of water daily. In this dry landscape, where every leaf and every drop counts, not all of them will be able to overcome the test of hunger and thirst. The decision is unanimous, not by consensus but by necessity. They must move, and fast. The herd sets off. At the head, the matriarch, the oldest and most experienced elephant, accurately remembers the ancient routes. They are paths marked throughout the ages, inscribed in a memory that transcends the individual. They move at a steady pace, but the distance is overwhelming. More than 300 kilometers separate these parched lands from the grasslands to the north, where the humidity maps show that the first rains have already returned. Among the adults, one calf, barely a year old, stands out. His short, clumsy legs try to keep up with the older ones. At each stop, the mother wraps her trunk around it, pushes it gently, offers protection and shade. His destiny is not only his own, he represents the living heritage of the herd, and every adult knows it. Along the journey through the parched savanna of Amboseli, Kenya, the hardships are relentless. The herd, exhausted after days of marching in search of water, faces a terrain where the heat overwhelms the most vulnerable. The older bodies, with joints worn out by decades of trekking, begin to weaken. On the second day, an elderly elephant, a male with long tusks and an emaciated body, collapses near a dry riverbed. His legs give way and his breathing stops under the weight of years. The herd, led by a half-century-old matriarch, stops instantly. They form a tight circle around the motionless body, a heavy silence broken only by the rustle of dry grass under her paws. The matriarch approaches first, reaching out her trunk to touch the head and tusks of the fallen, a slow, repetitive gesture. Other adults imitate her, brushing the body with their trunks, some emitting low snores that echo in the air. The young, watching from behind, remain still, learning from the elders. For several hours, the herd stays close to the carcass. Some pick up dirt with their trunks and throw it over the corpse, while others pull dry branches from nearby acacias to partially cover it. The matriarch, head down, caresses the remains one last time. There is no chance of reanimation, but the ritual is not rushed. Finally, the matriarch emits a soft bark, a signal to move. The herd, with slow steps, resumes marching toward the horizon, leaving behind the old man covered in dust and branches, a silent testament to his life on the savanna. As the herd resumes its march, the silence persists, broken only by the scuffing of their paws against the dry grass. The matriarch leads with firm steps, but her ears remain alert, picking up every sound in the savanna. The calves, still restless from the ritual, stay close to their mothers, while the adults advance with their heads lowered, as if carrying the weight of loss. Dust swirls in their wake, and the horizon, blurred in the heat, hides the threats that the savanna never ceases to harbor. The silence of the march is strained when a distant rustle in the grass alerts the matriarch, whose gaze sweeps the horizon in search of what the savanna always hides. A pride of lions, driven by hunger, calculates its chances. They know that the adults are imposing and lethal, but the younger ones could be overtaken. In an open stretch without shelter, they try to approach. The herd detects the threat immediately. The adults form a compact circle, fangs in front, bodies in a defensive position. The infant remains in the center, protected by the imposing living wall. The lions grope, circle, but recognize that a direct attack could cost them dearly. After a last round, the lions retreat, dissuaded by the strength of the pride. As evening falls on the sixth day, a thunderstorm in the distance announces that the journey is drawing to a close. In the distance, the outlines of acacias and baobabs can be made out. The vegetation announces what the herd has been chasing for days. The first contact with the new land is immediate. Some elephants approach a waterhole. Drinking greedily, they throw water over their bodies to cool themselves and relieve the accumulated heat. The young, including the infant, play in the water, splashing, sinking and emerging between trunks and legs. Here, food abounds: green leaves, fresh roots, nutritious bark. The herd rests under the shade of the acacia trees, calmly eating while the adults keep watch and the young explore in safety. The importance of these migrations transcends mere immediate survival. It's not just about finding water or food. Each journey is a lesson passed on. The young will memorize the paths, the water points, the safe havens, the threats. In each offspring is encoded the history of those who came before. In the infant of this herd, the millenary knowledge is preserved, ready to travel those same routes when its turn comes. Thus ends this journey, in a temporary calm that does not hide the certainty that it will be repeated. Because in Africa, and anywhere else on planet Earth, migration is not an option. It is the only guarantee that a species will be able to witness the dawn once more.